What would you do if your HOA president snuck through your fence at midnight just to steal your power? I just wanted peace by the lake. Until one night, a strange light flickered on my fence. Turned out, it was the HOA president, charging her Tesla from my outlet. What started as a single orange cord became a war of fines, rumors, and proof no one saw coming. Everyone thought I'd lost. Until 2:17 a.m., when the lake went dark. The morning came in soft as elk breath, a thin veil of mist riding low over Redwater Lake and the cottonwoods along the north shore. I brewed coffee in the kitchen that faces the water, listening to the steady tick of the cooling stove and the ticking of the old wall clock that used to hang in my father's shop. Somewhere out on the lake, a loon called once, then again, and the sound shivered across the surface like a fingernail on glass. The house smelled of cedar and coffee and damp wool from the jacket I'd left hanging near the door. It was the kind of quiet that makes a man think he's alone in the world. And that's when I noticed the power meter. The dial spun like spring runoff, a fast silver blur on the face behind the plastic lens. It wasn't cold enough for the heater, not hot enough for the well pump to be churning. I stood there with my mug and frowned, counting revolutions against habit, a trick I learned on dam sites when you trust numbers more than stories. Something was drawing hard load. I set the mug down, felt the old ranch floor creak under my boots, and followed the wire run in my head. Service dropped to panel, panel to boathouse, boathouse to the outdoor outlets by the pasture gate. The security monitor sits under the window in a little corner station I built from fence planks. Nothing fancy, but good enough. The cameras are old, the kind they stopped selling at the big box years ago, but I know where to put a lens so wind and light do the rest. I scrolled back through dawn. The pasture was a gray sheet with a darker line for the fence. The boathouse sat there like a quiet dog. And then, 3 hours before I rose, a shape slid into view. White robe, silk that caught the camera's infrared like a river stone catches sun. An orange extension cord looped over one arm, the coil bobbing against her hip. Bethany Whitfield took her time. She always does. She stepped along my fence like she owned the boards, slipped the cord through a gap where 2 pickets still wait for screws, and found the outdoor outlet beneath the eave of the boathouse. You could see the click of the cover, the careful way she pushed the plug in, one hand braced on the siding like she was steadying a fine jar. Then she stood up, dusted invisible dust from her robe, and threaded the line back toward the property line, where her white Tesla crouched on the other side, nose toward the lake like a curious animal. The car's charge port opened, and the strip lit green. In the camera's washed-out light, the green looked like a wound. I watched the whole thing with a stillness that would have scared my younger self. Then I rewound it and watched again. The meter on the wall by the pantry hummed. It's funny how a house tells you what's wrong if you've lived with it long enough. The wrongness echoed in the copper, in the screws, in the gaps between boards. It felt like a trespass more than a theft, like someone had stepped into a prayer and shouted, "By 8." The mist lifted off the lake and turned to silver in the sun. I walked out to the fence. The boards were cool under my palm, with that faint old wood sweetness that comes when rain dries slow. The orange cord still lay there in the grass like a snake. I uncoiled it without ceremony, unplugged both ends, and draped it over the fence post nearest the gate. The boathouse outlet clicked shut with a small, satisfied sound. When I turned around, Bethany was already striding down her lawn in tennis shoes that didn't know dirt. She carried a hardback binder the color of winter sky. The HOA seal, Willow Ridge, property values, community excellence, was pressed into the leather like a courthouse stamp. Her sunglasses were too dark for the morning, or maybe that was the point. She smiled the way a person smiles when they believe you're about to learn your place. "Good morning, Mr. Remy," she said, stopping exactly on the survey pin between our lots. We've had several complaints about unauthorized exterior fixtures. I thought I'd take a moment to help you get compliant. I held up the cord with 2 fingers. Looks to me like an unauthorized fixture visited last night and borrowed my power. Power is communal in spirit, if not in letter, she said, tilting her head. We are, after all, a forward-thinking community. Electric vehicles are the future, and your outlets are visible from common space. It presents confusion. Outlets on my boathouse wall aren't common space. I kept my voice as even as lake water. If you needed a charge, you could have asked. She opened the binder and tapped a page with a pink fingernail. Bylaw 14C, exterior modifications must conform to neighborhood aesthetic standards. These covers, she nodded toward the weatherproof outlet lids, aren't approved. And the chain you installed last month on your pasture gate? Not approved either. You walked onto my ground at 2 in the morning and plugged in your car, I said. That's not aesthetics. That's theft. She didn't flinch. If anything, the smile settled deeper. Words like that escalate things unnecessarily. We're neighbors, Jake. It's better to solve matters with civility and policy. There's an HOA meeting this week. I'll put electrical harmony solutions on the agenda. Behind her, the lake caught a gust and scuffed itself to diamonds. A magpie hopped along the fence and clicked its beak at nothing. I noticed the way Bethany kept 1 foot angled toward her house, as if retreat should always be available. That told me more than the binder did. Take your cord up, I said, and don't touch my outlets again. She closed the binder and hugged it to her chest. See you Thursday, she said, and lifted the cord from my hand like a prize ribbon. The Tesla chirped when she opened it. The sound felt indecent that early. After she left, the quiet did what quiet does. It tried to settle. I went back inside, pulled the worn folder from the drawer where I keep deeds, plats, and papers that matter more than opinions. The Remy place runs from the county road down to the water line, with the boathouse sitting on the old foundation my father poured before my year of birth. The HOA boundary stops at the top of my lane, by law, by vote, and by promise made when the developers came sniffing. I traced the language with my finger, the clause about electrical utility access on private shoreline structures. Not theirs. Mine. Still, numbers are cleaner than clauses. I called Marcus, who knows a line's mood by the twitch of his wrist. He said he'd swing by later, bring a clamp meter and a thermos. We don't talk much, but we've pulled enough cable together to know what silence can carry. The day moved on with small work. I patched the hinge on the lake gate, oiled the boathouse latch, ran my hands over the pine boards where the sun hits hardest. Every now and then I checked the monitor. Nothing. Bethany's Tesla sat smug in her driveway, white as the egret that hunts along the shallows at dusk. I told myself this was the end of it. People test fences. You fix the fence. End of story. Evening brought the smell of willow bark and the far-off murmur of a ranch truck on the county road. I ate standing at the counter, leftover venison and a heel of bread, then walked the pasture with the kind of patience you perform when you don't want your hands to do something they'll regret. A buck showed himself at the tree line and froze, head high, lake light caught in his antlers. By full dark the wind laid down. The stars came out in their 1,000 cold ways. I shut off the porch light and let the house breathe. The lake takes on a different voice at night. It shushes more, asks you to listen. Inside, the cameras click when they switch to night vision, a little insect sound you don't hear unless you're listening for it. I poured 1 more cup of coffee and sat by the monitor. An old habit. Watch the flow. Measure the gauge. Don't pretend it's fine if it isn't. At 1:42 a.m., a moth landed on the lens and fluttered its paper wings until the world looked like a storm of dust. I laughed at myself at the way a man can grow superstitions from plain nerves. I stood to stretch. That's when the boathouse wall took on a faint, unnatural glow, the smallest crescent of warm amber you've ever seen, lapping at the edge of the eave like a tongue of light trying to learn a new word. I leaned closer. A line moved in the far right of the frame, a pale shoulder, then the gleam of an orange coil. The camera smoothed the night into grays, but the color lived in my memory well enough. The outlet cover lifted. The crescent of light bloomed steady. On the meter by the pantry, the wheel began to whisper and then hum. I set my cup down so gently the saucer didn't complain. The house felt smaller and larger at once. You can tell yourself you are calm, that you are built of reservoir concrete and rebar logic, and then a stranger's hand on the switch will show you what you really are. I thought of the binder, the smile, the words like harmony and community, and how people use them when what they mean is mine, not yours. I didn't go outside, not that night. The lake asked me to be patient. The cameras recorded, the meter counted, and somewhere beyond the fence a white car drank what it had not earned. I wrote the time in pencil on the back of a feed receipt. 2:03 a.m. Then I tore the receipt cleanly along the crease and set the pieces side by side on the desk. It helped to see a line become two. By the time the first crow spoke, the glow was gone. The boathouse wall returned to its honest dark. I watched the strip of lake that shows between the dock pylons turn from ink to slate to steel. The coffee had gone cold. I told the house good morning, and it answered by settling its timbers, a soft groan that has lived here longer than me. If she's bold enough to steal my power once, I said into the still room, what's she really planning? The answer came around 9, in the sound of a mail truck coughing up the hill and a red flag thunking back to rest. I walked the lane and found a white envelope with a sky blue crest. Willow Ridge Homeowners Association. The cardstock was heavy, perfumed faintly, of something citrus that didn't belong to dirt. Notice of violation, it read in thick letters, like a judge clearing his throat. Unauthorized exterior fixtures, non-conforming outlet covers, chain across pasture gate creating visual blight visible from common view, corrective action required within 72 hours to avoid escalating fines. I held the paper up to the light. You can learn a lot from the way a page is put together. The font, the spacing, the careful appeal to importance. Down at the bottom, a signature leaned forward like a man in a hurry. Gregory Palmer, Compliance. I'd seen him once at a picnic with a clipboard he never put down. I folded the notice twice and slid it in my back pocket where sweat would make the ink give up a little of its dignity. Past the boathouse, the lake lifted and set its shoulders. Wind came from the west, carrying the dusty sweetness of hay. I ran a hand along the cedar siding until my fingers found the outlet covers, a pair of gray, code-compliant hoods I'd installed last winter after an ice storm. They looked plain, because plain things last. The chain on the pasture gate rattled a small protest when I checked the padlock. It was the same chain my father had used to keep calves from wandering down to chew the boat ropes. I spent an hour doing what men do when they're angry, cleaning what doesn't need cleaning. Leaves out of the skiff, spiderwebs off the eaves, oil on the hinges that already swung smooth. Then I went inside and dragged the old wooden map drawer from under the window, the one that sticks on mornings like this, and laid deed after deed on the table. Paper makes a sound different from anything else when it touches wood, like a match that never quite catches. The Remy deed is older than I am by just enough to be wise. My grandfather's name curls across the top, along with a date that could be a hymn, October 7th, 1968. Below that, field notes measured with a surveyor's patience, beginning at a point marked by a rusted iron pipe at the northeast corner of Section 12, thence south 600 feet to the waterline of Redwater Lake, including shoreline structures constructed in perpetuity for agricultural and navigational use. The language I needed sat there, quiet as a mule. Private utility service and improvements upon shoreline structures remain the sole responsibility and property of the grantee. No association, covenant, or neighborly compact shall abridge the same without written consent of the owner. I read it twice and then again, and felt the corners of my mouth do what they hadn't wanted to all morning. It didn't matter that I knew it in my bones. Sometimes you need the line written down to tell your blood to stand up. I flipped to the plat map. The HOA boundary stopped at the crown of my drive. The boathouse, the lower pasture, the run of rock that forms the small breakwater. All of it sat outside their lines like a man who'd chosen his chair before the meeting started. At 10, a truck door thumped out front. Marcus came in without knocking, which is how friends enter when there's work to do. He set his thermos on the counter and his clamp meter on the table next to the plat, like a preacher laying down a Bible and a hammer. "You look like a man who's already done half my job," he said. I slid the violation across. He read it, snorted once, then walked to the panel and opened it with 2 fingers like a safecracker. "No scorch marks, no heat," he said, his palm above the breakers. "But I can tell you when she plugged in, the draw jumped like a colt. You see the wheel this morning? Spinning like spring flood," I said. We went outside and he clipped the meter around the feed to the boathouse. The needle sat quiet. He squinted toward Bethany's yard where the Tesla glowed white in the noon sun like a bone. "She's got nerve," he said. "She's got a binder," I answered. We stood there a minute, listening to the lake rub itself against rock. A pair of kids pedaled by on the county road, their laughter scattering like birds. Somewhere down shore, a nail gun popped, building something that would look old before it ever knew weather. "I've got a friend at the co-op who can print consumption intervals by hour," Marcus said softly. "Might be a good graph to bring to—" He jerked his chin toward the HOA sign down at the crossroads. "If you're going to sit through that." "I'm going," I said, "and I'm bringing more than a graph." The afternoon swung into heat. I worked the fence line under the cottonwoods and tried not to look at Bethany's place. But it's funny how an invitation to anger behaves. It sits just outside your field of view and waves when you glance sideways. Around 2, the HOA email arrived. The subject line was cheerful to the point of threat. "Community update, exciting green initiative." The body of the note featured mock-ups of sleek charging stations at the edge of the common park, 10 yards from my pasture gate, close enough that a cord could slither under the fence like a fox. The paragraph about equitable sharing of electricity costs read like a nursery rhyme someone set to a cash register. The footer. This proposal will be fast-tracked for member safety and convenience. See you Thursday. I forwarded the email to Sarah Coleman with a single line. "Does fast-tracked smell legal to you?" Her response came before I could set the phone down. "Not if the funds were committed before a vote. Bring me your deed and the bylaws. Also, don't remove those outlet covers. They're code. Let them find what they can't define." I printed the bylaws anyway and read them on the porch, until the sun slipped past the cottonwoods and angled sharp into my eyes. It was all the same. Pages that pretended to be law, written by people who liked the sound of order. Buried near the end was a clause that made my coffee stir. The association's authority does not extend to privately owned shoreline structures established prior to formation, nor to utility systems serving the same, unless expressly deeded or annexed by vote. I traced that line with my thumb until the paper grew soft. Evening brought Bethany to the edge of her grass again, this time in a white blouse that made the shadows blue at her throat. She didn't cross the pin. She just stood there with that binder and watched me coil hose, as if patience itself were an instrument she meant to play. When she finally turned to go, I saw a man on her porch, Preston Hale, the developer who smiled at ground, the way a banker smiles at numbers. He had his phone at his ear and his eyes on me, and he nodded once, almost friendly, as if to say we were all adults here, all marching toward the same good future. I went inside before I said something my father wouldn't have. The house closed around me the way it does at night, smelling of cedar and lake water and the last inch of coffee in the pot. I laid the deed on the table again, placed the bylaws beside it, and then added the violation notice on top, white, blue, and the truth sandwiched between like a lesson. Paper does burn, but it also remembers. You can hold it up in a room and make men see. Out past the dock, the first bats wrote quick black letters on the sky. I shut down the lights and left the cameras to their watch. Tomorrow would be phone calls, to the co-op, to Sarah, to anyone who could stitch numbers into a story that even a boardroom could understand. The meter on the pantry wall ticked once as the well pump sighed and quit. In the quiet that followed, the lake made a promise only I could hear. I slid the violation out of my pocket, creased and warm from the day, and read the last line again about fines escalating. Then I folded it back into thirds and slid it into a folder marked Bethany. I clicked my pen and wrote a new label on the tab, Federal and State Code. Let's see how she handles federal code, I whispered to the room, and the house, dignified as ever, said nothing at all. The next few mornings came with frost and long light across the lake, the kind that makes everything look like it's been dusted with glass. The air smelled of pine sap and cold iron. My breath showed as I worked, tightening the fence hinges, greasing the gate chain, and checking the conduit that fed the boathouse. I'd always been an engineer first, rancher second. Fixing things before they failed was a habit I couldn't shake, even when the failure had a human face. Marcus stopped by again on Wednesday, his old Ford grumbling up the gravel with the rattle of tools in back. He carried 2 mugs of coffee and a look that meant he'd been thinking too much. "You sure you want to poke this hornet nest?" he asked, setting the mugs on the hood of my truck. "It's not a hornet nest if the hornets started drilling holes in my house," I said. He gave a dry laugh and pulled a small device from his jacket. "Picked this up from a buddy who audits energy firms. Records power use in real time, down to the second. Logs the amperage, timestamps it, keeps it clean for court if it ever goes that far." "Court?" He shrugged. "You never know when a rich fool will lawyer up. You said federal code. Might as well have the data to back your mouth." We ran conduit under the deck and installed the small gray box near the panel where the feeder line split to the boathouse. It hummed to life with a low vibration you could feel through your fingertips. The display blinked zeros like eyes waking up. After he left, I sat in the shop until the shadows grew long. The shop smelled like diesel and oak dust, the scent of every job I'd ever finished late. Tools hung in orderly rows above the bench, levels, wrenches, a battered voltmeter that's been with me since my core days. I ran my thumb across the edge of a steel bracket and thought of the projects we used to build overseas. Dam gates, surge valves, things meant to withstand floods and fools alike. That's when the idea came. Not vengeance, not sabotage, protection. Something smart, automatic, clean. A system that would record any draw from those outlets and protect itself from overload. A surge protection system, the kind industrial farms use to cut power in milliseconds when lines are tampered with. Nothing illegal, nothing hidden, just smart engineering and patience. I sketched until the lamp buzzed and my coffee turned bitter. By the time the first coyote called out near the ridge, I had a design, a sealed metal box with current sensors, voltage monitoring, data logging, and a relay that would cut power after 3 warnings. It would even flash a small amber light before shutdown, enough for anyone with sense to stop. I ordered the components online, expedited shipping. The box would arrive Friday. Thursday evening, I took the old aluminum skiff out across the lake. The water was still, carrying the reflection of Bethany's house like a mirror too polite to lie. From here you could see the ridiculous symmetry of it. Bright columns, white trim, the Tesla Charger mounted like a trophy beside her driveway. I killed the motor and floated near the reeds. The boathouse creaked behind me, old timbers adjusting to the temperature drop. That's when I saw movement on her deck. Bethany stood there in a wine-colored sweater, phone in one hand, the other trailing across the railing as she laughed at something invisible. The sound reached me across the water, small but sharp. It was the sound of someone who believed the world would always work in her favor. I went back inside that night and wrote out the plan in ink. Step 1. Install the SPS. Step 2. Document every watt. Step 3. Notify HOA in writing about code compliance for safety signage. If they wanted to play paperwork, I'd drown them in it. Friday dawned brittle and bright. The UPS driver left the box by the gate, dust still settling around his tires when I carried it to the workshop. Inside lay a neat array of metal and wires, promise disguised as parts. I spent the whole afternoon assembling it, marking each terminal with the steadiness only long years and quiet anger can teach. When it was done, I bolted the enclosure beside the boathouse outlet, sealed every connection, and tested it. The LED came alive, steady green at first, then pulsing amber in a slow rhythm. The readout on my monitor inside the house showed 0 current, just as it should. I logged the installation time, took photographs, even copied the serial number of every component. If the day came when this was questioned, there would be nothing to hide. The following morning, the lake was glass again. Mist hung low enough to touch. I sipped coffee and listened to the SPS hum faintly through the open window. I could feel its heartbeat in the wiring. At noon, a white Lexus rolled up to my gate. Bethany stepped out wearing gloves the color of old roses and sunglasses that belonged in another season. She didn't open the gate, just leaned on it. "Jake," she called, "we need to talk about your latest modification." I walked out slow. "You mean the safety device?" She smiled, sharp and sweet. "The board received a complaint about unapproved equipment visible from common areas. We'll need it removed before inspection Monday." "Inspection?" "Gregory and Preston will be conducting it. HOA procedure. You understand?" I nodded once. "I understand exactly." Her smile lingered a second too long before she turned and walked back to her car, gravel whispering under her heels. When she was gone, I looked at the SPS light, steady, calm, unbothered, and felt the same resolve settle in my chest. That night, the first log appeared, 0047 hours, slight voltage spike, duration 30 seconds. Then silence. Someone had tested the plug, just enough to see if the system still lived. It did. I saved the data, backed it up twice, and closed my laptop. Outside, the wind rose off the lake carrying the sihuang, scent of wood smoke from someone's fireplace and the faint electric tang that always comes before rain. The boathouse light flickered once, a heartbeat in the dark, and held steady. Somewhere across the water, a Tesla Charger blinked impatiently in the cold. By Thursday afternoon, the weather turned heavy, clouds sagging low over the ridge and pressing the light flat against the lake. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 sharp at the Willow Ridge Clubhouse, a low stone building that tried too hard to look rustic. I put on my cleanest denim shirt, the one without a tear at the elbow, and slipped the folder marked Federal and State Code under my arm. Marcus had offered to come, but I told him to stay home. "No need for backup," I said, though part of me wished I hadn't. The air felt charged already, as if the room I was walking into would have its own weather system. The clubhouse smelled of lemon polish and old carpet when I stepped inside. A dozen folding chairs faced a long table draped with a green cloth. the HOA crest printed in gold thread at its center. The board members sat behind it like a small jury. Frank Dwyer, the president, who looked perpetually lost in his own notes. Gregory Palmer, the inspector with his clipboard clutched like a badge. And of course, Bethany Whitfield, vice president and queen of every silence she created. She greeted me with a smile sharp enough to cut fabric. "Mr. Remy," she said, standing just long enough for formality. "Glad you could join us. We're discussing an exciting proposal tonight, one that might benefit everyone." I nodded toward her binder. I saw the email. Her eyes flickered behind the glasses. "Wonderful. We're moving forward with our community sustainability initiative. Electric vehicle stations near the park, modern, green, forward-thinking. The costs will be distributed evenly, of course." "Evenly?" I said. "Including the households without electric vehicles?" "Everyone benefits from progress," she answered smoothly. Frank coughed, looking between us. "We'll hear community feedback in a moment. First, let's let Vice President Whitfield present her findings." Bethany opened her binder. Pages gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She spoke in that honeyed tone politicians use when they already know the vote will go their way. Charts, estimates, a slideshow projected onto a wrinkled sheet. Each number tilted just enough to look harmless. When she finished, the room clapped politely. The sound was soft, like rain that doesn't know if it wants to fall. "Any comments from residents?" Frank asked. I rose. The chair legs scraped wood, a sound louder than it should have been. "Jake Remy, Lake Parcel 7. I've got a concern." Bethany's smile tightened but didn't fade. "Please keep comments brief." I opened my folder and placed the deed photocopy on the table. "This clause here, Section 12, line 42, states the HOA has no authority over utilities on pre-existing shoreline structures. My boathouse, my lines, my outlets. Yet I've received fines for them, and now I'm hearing plans for shared power costs that cross property boundaries." A murmur rolled through the crowd. Someone whispered, "That true?" Another, "We pay enough already." Bethany leaned forward, the light catching her necklace. "Mr. Remy, this isn't about you. This is about progress. You can't hide behind archaic paperwork forever." "It's not archaic," I said, keeping my voice level. "It's binding. And while you're preaching progress, someone's been stealing power from my line. I have timestamps, footage, and usage data." The room stilled. Gregory looked up from his clipboard. Frank fidgeted with his pen. Bethany laughed lightly. "Let's not turn this into a witch hunt. Perhaps you should check your wiring. Old systems tend to leak power." Her tone was syrup over a blade. "Then maybe you can explain why that leak occurs only between 1 and 4 a.m., I said. "Same hours your Tesla charges." Gasps fluttered across the room. A man in the back whispered something to his wife. Bethany's cheeks colored just a shade too fast. "This meeting is for board matters," she said crisply. "Personal disputes belong elsewhere. You may submit your grievance in writing." Frank nodded, grateful to have something to agree with. "Yes, please. Procedure must be followed." I looked at him, then at the small crowd of neighbors who suddenly found the floor interesting. "Procedure," I repeated, softer now. "You'll have your procedure." I gathered my papers, slid them back into the folder, and buttoned the flap. As I turned to leave, Sarah Coleman stepped out from the back row. Her dark hair was tied low, her blazer simple and unassuming, but her eyes had the clarity of someone who sees angles where others see fog. She worked with water rights law out of Billings, had helped a few locals win back their irrigation easements last year. "Jake," she said quietly, meeting me near the door, "I heard what you said. Bring me the footage and the bills. I'll check the filings for that green project. You think it's worth chasing?" Her smile was small but certain. If contracts were signed before the vote, it's more than worth chasing. It's fraud. Behind us, Bethany's voice floated out, resuming the meeting as if nothing had cracked. Now, regarding landscaping compliance, I stepped out into the cold. The rain had finally arrived, fine and slanted, whispering through the pines. The parking lot lights made halos on the wet gravel. Sarah walked beside me to her truck, glancing once toward Bethany's house across the ridge. "She's hiding something," Sarah said. "I know," I replied. "Now we just have to catch it on paper." As I drove home, the wipers thumped in rhythm with my thoughts. The lake lay still, reflecting only the porch lights scattered along its banks. When I turned into my drive, the camera feed pinged once, a new log entry from the Smart Protection System. Timestamp, 22:47 hours. Minor voltage fluctuation detected. The SPS light on the boathouse pulsed, amber 3 times, then returned to steady green. I stood in the doorway, watching it blink against the rain, feeling the kind of calm that comes before thunder decides to speak. All through that night, the storm rolled low across the lake. Wind rattled the shutters and made the metal sign at the gate cry out in its hinges. The rain came hard and sudden, washing the smell of pine pitch and wet earth into every room. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop open, the log screen alive with faint blue glow. Line after line scrolled quietly across the page, voltage steady, amperage normal. The house's pulse clean and calm. Around midnight, the storm slowed to drizzle. I poured myself another coffee and walked out to the porch. The lake was flat again, black glass scattered with faint reflections from porch lamps along the opposite bank. Bethany's house stood like a ghost behind the tree line, its windows dark. By 1:30, I was ready to shut down the monitor. But then one short tone from the SPS system, a soft, single ping, like a question whispered through the wire. I leaned closer. The reading had changed. Draw detected, unregistered load, 9.3 kilowatts and climbing. The monitor clock read 2:14 a.m. The feed from the boathouse camera showed nothing at first, but the line of the dock and the rippled light of the shoreline. Then the movement came into frame. A shape in a silk robe, hair pinned up under a hood, the familiar orange coil dragging through puddles. Even from the distance, you could tell she'd done this before. Confident steps, no hesitation. Bethany plugged in her cord under the eave, glancing once toward her house. The amber warning light began its slow rhythm, blink, pause, blink, the first safety alert. "Back off," I murmured to no one. The light blinked again, brighter now, audible warning engaged, a soft chime like the start of a microwave. She ignored it, of course. Instead, she turned the Tesla's settings on her phone, and the charge rate spiked. The SPS registered the surge. Second warning. A light gust swept across the lake, pressing the rain sideways. In the camera feed, her robe fluttered like a white flag someone refused to wave. "Don't do it," I whispered. At 2:17 a.m. exactly, she raised her chin and hit the override on her charger app. The wattage doubled instantly. The system responded the only way it could. The amber light became solid red. The tone shifted to a low hum, and then everything cut. The outlet, the boathouse, even the reflection on the water. The monitor went dark for 3 beats before rebooting. When the feed came back, Bethany stood motionless in the rain, staring at the dead car. The Tesla's dashboard flickered once and died. The charge port light blinked twice, error message visible on the screen. Then nothing. Silence swallowed the dock and the lake together. I didn't move for a full minute. The coffee in my hand had gone cold again. My breath fogged the monitor glass. The SPS log wrote its final line for the night. Unauthorized surge detected. System shutdown complete. I leaned back in the chair, every muscle wired but still. I hadn't built it to punish anyone, only to protect what was mine. Yet the quiet satisfaction that rolled through me felt heavier than any victory I'd known. Out across the lake, the storm began to clear. The moon came out behind shredded clouds, throwing silver across the soaked grass and fence lines. I could just make out Bethany's silhouette trudging back toward her house, cord dragging limp behind her like a defeated banner. I saved the footage twice, once to the hard drive and again to a flash stick that I slipped into the envelope with my other evidence. When I looked up, the first pale thread of dawn had touched the horizon. The world smelled new again, wet, clean, forgiving. By morning, word traveled faster than light over water. When I stepped outside, Marcus was waiting by his truck, hat pulled low. "You saw?" I asked. "Didn't need to. Heard her screaming half the county awake around 3. He shook his head slowly. "Car's dead. Says the system fried it. You better believe she's making calls. She'll blame me. She already has." He handed me a paper bag from the hardware store. Inside was a fresh padlock and a roll of security tape. "You're gonna want to make it clear you followed code. Sheriff's office might stop by." By noon, the neighborhood was humming with gossip. Trucks slowed as they passed my gate, folks craning to see what new scandal the lake had coughed up. The HOA message board lit up with posts about electrical sabotage and reckless endangerment. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went to town, sat with the sheriff, gave him a thumb drive and the certification paperwork. He watched the clip twice, scratching the back of his neck. "She ignored 3 warnings?" he said. "Every one." He nodded. "You're covered, Jake. System's legal, compliant, safe. But she's gonna fight dirty. You be ready." Outside, the wind had shifted to the north, dry and cold. I drove back along the ridge road and saw Bethany's Tesla on a flatbed, rainwater streaking down its hood like tears. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, phone to her ear. When she caught sight of my truck, she turned her face away. Back home, I parked by the gate and watched the lake settle again into its quiet rhythm. The SPS light glowed steady green. I poured a coffee, sat at the table, and stared out at the water until the day drained of color. Somewhere beyond the ridge, thunder rolled again, a promise of the next storm to come. At first light, the rain was gone, leaving the air sharp and wet, a cold scent of iron and pine. The house creaked softly as it warmed, and I'd just started on a second cup when someone pounded at the door. Not the polite knuckle kind of knock, flat-palmed, fast, and furious. Through the glass, I saw Bethany Whitfield, hair tangled, silk robe clinging to her shoulders. Her eyes were wild, mascara washed thin. The sound of her voice hit before I opened the door. "You vindictive little man!" she screamed, pointing straight at me. "You destroyed my car! My husband's already called the lawyer." Behind her, a few neighbors were gathering by the fence line, drawn by the noise. The morning air trembled with that uncomfortable hush people wear when watching someone else's trouble. I stepped outside, coffee still in hand. "Morning, Bethany. You're trespassing again." Her voice cracked, full of rage and disbelief. "Trespassing? You're lucky I don't have you arrested. My Tesla is completely dead. Bricked, they called it. $22,000 in damage. And the service tech said it was caused by a power surge. Do you deny it?" "I don't deny anything," I said calmly. "The protection system worked exactly as designed. You ignored 3 warning lights and a clear posted sign. You used private power without permission. That's theft, Bethany. Simple as that." Her face flushed, then turned pale as she realized half the street could hear us. I noticed Gregory Palmer watching from across the road, clipboard in hand, pretending to take notes about shrub height. The man couldn't help himself. Bethany lowered her voice, but not the venom. "I'll have your system removed. I'll have the board fine you until you can't breathe. You'll regret embarrassing me." Before I could answer, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up the drive, gravel crunching under its tires. Sheriff McKay stepped out, his tan hat low against the morning glare. The man moved slow, steady, same pace he used when sorting arguments over loose cattle or fence lines. "Mornin', Jake," he said, then tipped his hat to her. "Miss Whitfield." "Sheriff," she said, snapping to attention, "you need to arrest him. He rigged some kind of trap, an illegal device that destroyed my vehicle." McKay raised an eyebrow. "You saying he booby-trapped something?" "It was deliberate." I handed him the folder I'd prepared before sunrise, neat as church records. System schematics, serial numbers, and code compliance certifications. There's also footage, timestamps, and 3 verbal and visual warnings ignored before automatic shutoff. McKay flipped through the first few pages, lips tightening as he read. "You got this system certified with the county?" "2 weeks ago, page 6. He nodded once, kept reading, then turned toward Bethany. "Miss Whitfield, you see those warning lights?" She hesitated. "There. We're blinking things, yes, but 3 of them?" Her silence said enough. The sheriff closed the folder and sighed. "I don't see a crime here, ma'am. Looks like you ignored safety alerts and fried your own equipment. If anything, you might owe Mr. Remy for unauthorized use." Her jaw dropped. "You're taking his side?" "I'm taking the side of what's written down," he said. "That's what courts like best." He turned back to me. "I'll file an incident report for the record. You keep all this paperwork somewhere safe. Sounds like lawyers are circling." When he left, Bethany stood there trembling, not from cold, but from humiliation. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "This isn't over, Jake. You think your little gadgets and papers can save you? You've made an enemy in this neighborhood." "Bethany," I said softly, "you made one when you crossed that fence." She turned and stormed off, her slippers kicking up gravel. The watching neighbors scattered like leaves before a gust. I could feel every eye that lingered behind curtains as her front door slammed shut. By afternoon, the story spread like wildfire. Some said I'd electrocuted her car on purpose. Others said she'd tried to tamper with the county's grid. Every retelling added a new detail, sparks flying, smoke, shouting that never happened. Marcus dropped by near sundown, shaking his head. "She's telling anyone who'll listen that you're unstable, that the army let you go for a reason." "Expected that," I said. He looked over his shoulder toward her house. "You gonna fight it?" "Not yet," I said. "Let her talk. Sooner or later, words weigh more than truth, and then they sink." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. Before leaving, he set a small hard drive on my table. "Backup of the footage. Keep it somewhere safe." That night, I filed every document again, hard copy, digital, and off-site. Years of engineering taught me one thing. When you expect pressure, you build redundancy. The lake outside was glass, moonlight silvering the ripples. The boathouse light glowed steady, reflected twice, once in the water, once in the window where I watched it. Somewhere beyond the ridge, dogs barked, then fell silent. I could almost hear the hum of the rumor mill spinning up, faster than any meter could count. I closed the blinds, turned off the monitor, and sat alone in the dark kitchen. For the first time since it all began, I felt a thread of worry pull tight through the calm. Not for the power lines or the car, but for the things you can't fix with wrenches or code. Reputations, once burned, take longer to rebuild than any battery ever made. By sunrise, the air around the lake was different. Still, heavy, the kind of silence that listens back. I walked to the gate and found 2 envelopes clipped to the fence post, both stamped with the HOA seal. The first was another violation notice, This one for property signage inconsistent with neighborhood design. The second was worse. A summons to appear before the board for a disciplinary hearing. I could almost hear Bethany's manicured laughter behind the wording. I tore the envelopes open and let the wind take the scraps down the road. Then I checked my phone. Dozens of unread messages blinked like tiny sirens. Neighbors, local friends, even a supplier up in Billings. Each one some variation of the same poison. Heard you sabotaged her car. They say you're being investigated. Man, what the hell happened out there? The rumors had arrived, faster than the storm I'd seen coming. Marcus showed up around noon, looking older than usual. You seen the posts? He asked, dropping a folded newspaper on my porch table. Across the front page of the local column, a headline read, HOA leader claims local rancher endangered the community grid. Underneath, a blurry photo of my boathouse zoomed in from across the water made the light fixture look menacing. She's feeding the media now, I said, jaw tightening. She's got friends downtown, Marcus replied, and half this county eats whatever comes out of that HOA bulletin. I looked out over the lake where Bethany's house sat pristine again, windows gleaming like eyes that had never wept. Her husband's silver Mercedes was back in the driveway, clean and polished. She'd regrouped, turned humiliation into offense. That was her real skill. Let her talk, I muttered. Truth has longer legs. Maybe, Marcus said, but lies sprint faster. That afternoon, the sheriff's truck rolled up again. McKay climbed out, hat in hand. Morning, Jake. Got a minute? Always. He stepped onto the porch, glancing toward the lake. You're not under investigation, just so you know, but folks are calling the station nonstop. HOA's claiming your setup's unsafe for residential zones. County approved it. Yep, I've got the paperwork. Doesn't stop people from worrying. He hesitated. Look, off the record, keep your head down. Let things cool. The more noise you make, the more they'll twist it. I'm not built for hiding, I said. He sighed, setting his hat back on. Then at least build your case higher than their gossip. Because the board's gonna push this hearing like it's Judgment Day. After he left, the quiet came back meaner. I spent the evening reviewing every file, every timestamp, every email. My desk was a battlefield of papers and flash drives. Around 9, I found Sarah Coleman's message buried in my inbox. Got something. Need to meet. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., my office. Bring coffee. I drove to Billings, the Soul. Next day, the mountains sitting blue and heavy in the distance. Her office was small, tucked above an old insurance firm, walls lined with case files and framed certifications. She looked up from her laptop as I walked in, eyes bright with that same dry humor that kept her steady in a fight. You weren't kidding about storms, she said, accepting the cup I handed her. They've turned you into the villain of the week. I noticed. She pulled a thin folder from her desk and slid it over. Here's your lightning rod. HOA expenditure files, 6 months worth. Got them through a resident request. Take a look at page 3. The numbers were tidy, columns of transactions labeled Green Infrastructure Initiative. Contractor, Hale and Whitfield Development, LLC. Preston's company, I said quietly. She nodded. Signed before the HOA vote. That's misappropriation of member funds, at least on paper. I stared at the page, feeling something shift beneath the fatigue. Proof wasn't just lines on paper. It was momentum, weight. You can take this public, Sarah said, but be careful. They'll say you fabricated it. You need witnesses, homeowners who'll stand up. Marcus will. Good. Get others, families, folks she overcharged. Build it slow, not loud. We'll draft a motion for full audit before the next meeting. Driving home, the road shimmered with heat. I rolled down the window, let the smell of sage and rain-damp soil fill the cab. The storm clouds were gathering again, bruised and heavy over the ridgeline. When I reached the lake, a crowd had gathered near Bethany's yard. I parked at the gate and watched from the truck. She stood on her porch, addressing a handful of neighbors like a mayor giving a victory speech. Phrases carried on the wind: unsafe practices, electrical hazard, negligence endangering the community. People nodded. A few looked toward my property, whispering. I stepped out of the truck just as lightning cracked far off to the west. The sound rolled across the valley like a slow drum. Bethany stopped mid-sentence, eyes flicking toward me. I didn't say a word, just looked back, steady as the mountain behind me. After a long moment, she turned away and went inside. By the time the storm broke, the crowd had scattered. Rain fell in thin, slanting lines, tapping on the tin roof of the boathouse. I stood by the door watching water bead on the SPS enclosure, each drop racing down the metal skin like seconds on a clock. The logs on my laptop blinked once, new data appearing. Unauthorized connection attempts, community outlet, not mine. She was still at it, testing other circuits, searching for another way to feed her pride. I smiled despite the weariness. Let her try. I had more than proof now. I had the pattern. Outside, thunder rolled low and patient. Then we'll let the sunlight do what it does best, I said softly, closing the laptop. Expose. The next morning broke clear, washed clean by the night's storm. The lake looked like a pane of glass that had forgotten how to move. Mist clung low over the cattails, and the sound of a distant mower hummed across the ridge. Everything looked peaceful, except peace was the one thing missing. I spent the day printing out charts and screenshots until the printer coughed its last drop of ink. Voltage graphs, HOA invoices, bank records, all neatly labeled, highlighted, and dated. Marcus dropped by with 2 boxes of donuts and a roll of tape. Think anyone's gonna listen? He asked, glancing at the pile of papers. They'll listen, I said, because I'm not giving them a choice. Sarah called just after noon. Board moved the hearing to tonight, she said. They're calling it a community transparency forum. Classic spin. Guess they plan to bury me before supper. Let them try, she said. You have facts. They have noise. By 6 o'clock, the clubhouse was packed. Pickup trucks lined the road all the way to the park gate. I parked near the end of the gravel and walked up the path, the folder under my arm heavy as a weapon. The air inside the hall was hot, thick with perfume and aftershave, that strange blend of suburban civility and simmering tension. Folding chairs scraped the floor as people settled. The HOA table gleamed under fluorescent lights, polished until you could see your reflection distorted in the shine. At its center sat Bethany Whitfield, hair perfect, voice smooth as cream over ice. Her husband Preston sat just behind her, whispering into a phone like a man managing damage control. I caught Marcus's eye near the back. Sarah sat beside him, a stack of legal folders in her lap. Sheriff McKay leaned against the wall by the exit, arms folded, quiet but watchful. Bethany opened the meeting with the smile of a queen welcoming her subjects. Good evening, everyone. Before we begin tonight's agenda, I want to address the unfortunate rumors spreading around our community. There have been accusations, false of course, of financial mismanagement, safety violations, even personal misconduct. A polite murmur rippled through the crowd. She continued, These claims come from a misunderstanding, one that has damaged reputations and caused unnecessary division. And while we all sympathize with Mr. Remy's situation, that's enough. My voice carried louder than I'd intended, echoing through the hall. I walked toward the front, the wooden floor creaking under my boots. You can sympathize later. For now, we're going to deal in proof. Bethany's smile didn't falter, but her fingers tightened on the edge of the table. Mr. Remy, the floor is yours for 5 minutes. I placed the laptop on the table, connected the HDMI cable, and let the projector hum to life. The first image appeared on the screen behind me. A video still of her extension cord snaking under my fence, timestamp clear as a confession. 6 months ago, I began. This community paid nearly $25,000 for an electrical upgrade, one approved without a proper vote. The contract was signed by this board's vice president before a single resident saw a draft. Gasps from the back. Those funds went to Hale and Whitfield Development, I continued, clicking to the next slide. Copy of the payment authorization, Preston's signature shining under the projector light. That's her husband's company. Preston shifted in his seat, jaw tightening. Bethany kept her smile, but her eyes flicked sideways, fast and sharp. Sarah stood up from the back. Under Montana's HOA statute 358202, that's a conflict of interest. Using community dues for private gain, without vote, is grounds for removal. The room erupted. Whispers, shouts, disbelief. Bethany raised a hand. Out of context, she said, voice trembling just enough to sound human. That contract was for approved green infrastructure. Everything was reviewed. I clicked to the next slide. A chart showing the HOA's electric bill climbing month by month, each spike highlighted in red. Reviewed by who? Because every increase lines up perfectly with the nights your Tesla charged between 1 and 4 a.m. The murmuring turned to noise. Someone called out, "We've been paying for that?" Bethany's control cracked. "You're twisting numbers, Jake. You installed a dangerous device. Everyone saw what it did." "Dangerous?" I said, stepping closer. "The county approved that system. Sheriff can confirm." McKay straightened, voice calm. "I reviewed the paperwork. Certified and legal. If you ignored warnings, that's on you." The crowd buzzed again. I could see it happening. The tilt of the room. The slow turn of doubt into understanding. Bethany slammed her folder shut. "This is harassment." Sarah lifted a hand. "No, this is accountability." She stepped forward, her tone steady, legal. "We're calling for a motion, full restitution of misused HOA funds, removal of the vice president, and independent audit of all recent expenditures." Dozens of voices rose in agreement. Papers shuffled, hands went up. Bethany tried to speak again, but her words drowned under the wave of votes. Preston leaned forward, whispering urgently, but she only stared at the papers in front of her as if they'd betrayed her too. I unplugged the projector, the screen fading to white. The noise settled into an uneasy silence. When I turned, Bethany's eyes met mine. Anger, disbelief, and something like fear flickering behind the glassy calm. "You think this fixes anything?" she whispered. "People like me don't lose." "Maybe not," I said, "but they get caught." As I walked back down the aisle, the wooden floor echoed under my boots. The sheriff's pen scratched against paper as he took notes. Outside, the wind had picked up again, rattling the flag on the pole until it flapped like something trying to break free. The meeting continued without her. For the first time in months, the hall's noise didn't feel like accusation. It felt like release. I sat in the back, letting the voices wash over me. The gavel struck once, twice, the sound hollow and final. Frank Dwyer's voice trembled as he read the vote aloud. "Motion passes. Full restitution, removal from office, and a complete audit of accounts effective immediately." Someone clapped, then another. It spread slow, cautious at first, then gathered strength. Even Marcus, who hated crowds, let out a low whistle. Sarah smiled faintly, scribbling something on her legal pad. The sheriff nodded from his post near the wall, eyes calm but alert. Bethany didn't move. She sat behind the long table, hands folded so tight her knuckles turned white. Preston leaned close, whispering in her ear, but she didn't seem to hear him. The papers on the table, the contracts, invoices, signatures. fluttered in the draft from the open window. For a long moment, the only sound was that soft rustle of pages. Then, almost in slow motion, the top sheet slid from the stack and drifted to the floor. Another followed, then another. Within seconds, the air was filled with paper, forms, receipts, bills of sale, all swirling like pale leaves in a current no one could stop. When the last page settled, Frank cleared his throat. Meeting adjourned. Bethany stood, pushing the chair back hard enough to make it squeal. "You think this circus means anything?" she said, her voice cracking through the hush. "You people are ungrateful. Everything I did, everything was for this community." No one answered. You could feel the shift in the room, the kind of collective silence that leaves a person standing alone, even in a crowd. She gathered her purse and the remains of her pride and marched out the door, Preston trailing behind her, his face unreadable. Sarah joined me by the exit. "That's one for the record books," she said softly. "Feels strange," I admitted, "like winning a war I didn't want." "That's usually how justice feels," she said, then handed me a thin folder. "Copy of the motion and the vote tally. Keep it safe. HOA rules say any appeal has to be filed within 30 days. After that, it's over." Outside, the night was cool, quiet. The moon hung low over the lake, reflecting off the damp pavement. A few neighbors approached me, folks I hadn't spoken to in months. The Thompsons, the elderly Andersons, even Gregory Palmer, the clipboard warrior himself. Gregory rubbed the back of his neck. "I owe you an apology, Jake. Should have looked closer when the complaints came through. I let her talk me into things I shouldn't have." I nodded. "Takes a decent man to admit it." He sighed. "Decent's been a moving target lately. I'll do better." One by one, people drifted away, their footsteps fading into gravel and wind. The hall lights clicked off behind us, and the quiet came down heavy and clean. When I got home, the house greeted me with that same old creak, like it was exhaling after holding its breath too long. I set the folder on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long while. The logs from the SPS were still running on the monitor. I scrolled through the entries. Steady voltage, no spikes, no tampering. The green light on the boathouse glowed faintly through the window, steady as a heartbeat. For the first time in months, I shut the system off. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of peace. 2 days later, a moving truck pulled up at the Whitfield house. I watched from my porch as workers carried out furniture, paintings, boxes of things that had probably never known dust. Bethany stood in the doorway, her hair tied back, no makeup, no audience. When she looked toward the lake, her eyes met mine across the distance. For a second, I thought she might wave. She didn't. Preston emerged last, phone pressed to his ear, pacing the porch while the crew loaded the last crate. He stopped once, halfway down the steps, and looked straight at me. There was something like exhaustion in his face. A man who'd realized the kind of storm he'd married. Then they were gone. Martha Wilson, the widow who lived 2 doors down, came walking over that afternoon with her sun hat and a mason jar of sweet tea. "Saw the truck leave," she said. "Didn't even say goodbye." "Goodbyes are for neighbors," I said. "They were tourists." Martha chuckled and handed me the jar. "The board's already planning elections. You should run." "Not my calling," I said. "I'll help them fix what's broken. But I'm done sitting in rooms that smell like lemon polish and lies." She smiled. "You might find that honesty spreads faster than rumor, once folks remember what it sounds like." That evening, as the sun bled orange over the ridge, I stood by the fence and watched the light fade across the lake. The boathouse looked small against the horizon, its reflection trembling in the gentle current. Wind moved through the cattails, whispering the same word it had been whispering since this all began. Enough. I thought of my grandfather, who'd once told me that justice isn't loud, It's the moment a man finally sleeps through the night without checking his locks. When I went inside, the kitchen clock read 9:03. The air smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked wood. I sat at the table, the folder still there beside my mug, and wrote one last note across its front. Resolved. Weeks passed, and the neighborhood settled into something it hadn't known in a long time. Quiet honesty. The kind that doesn't need fences or bylaws to hold it together. Every morning, the fog rolled off Redwater Lake like a soft memory, and the world seemed lighter for it. The new HOA board moved quick. Sarah helped draft transparent regulations. Marcus volunteered to oversee maintenance, and the Thompsons planted flowers around the old notice board. At the top of every meeting agenda now sat 3 simple words: transparency, fairness, accountability. By late summer, the board unveiled the new metered charging stations down by the boathouse. Simple, practical, and fair. Each plug had its own small meter, its own account. No more shared circuits, no hidden wires through the shrubs. The first time I saw a neighbor's Chevy Bolt charging there under the cottonwoods, it almost made me laugh. How easy it had always been to do things right. That same afternoon, Sheriff McKay stopped by, leaning on his truck door with that easy grin of his. "Heard they're finally using those fancy chargers the right way," he said. "Yeah, even got a waiting list now. Guess you taught folks more about electricity than you meant to." I smiled. Didn't teach them anything they didn't already know. Just reminded them to pay attention. He nodded. "Bethany's case closed last week. No appeal filed. County dismissed all her claims. Looks like she and Preston settled out of state." "Where'd they land?" "Some gated place down in Arizona. Desert might treat 'em better than water ever did." When he left, I walked the fence line, boots brushing against the dry grass. The lake was low from the heat, exposing the old rocks that usually hid under the surface. I stopped at the boathouse. The SPS box was still mounted under the eave, clean and silent. I reached up, brushed a line of dust from its surface, and smiled at the faint outline where the warning sticker used to be. A pair of loons called across the lake, their voices threading through the still air like old songs that never quite leave you. I thought of my grandfather again, the way he used to lean on his cane by the dam and say, "Water remembers, Jake. Not names or faces, but weight, flow, truth. It always finds balance again." He was right. The balance had come back to this place, not through anger, not through revenge, but through the steady rhythm of doing what was right and letting the facts stand taller than the noise. Martha's community garden bloomed that fall. Rows of corn and beans climbed up wooden trellises, and children ran between them, chasing each other with paper pinwheels. I built a small bench by the waterline from leftover cedar planks. Sometimes, on slow evenings, I'd find neighbors sitting there. People who once crossed the street to avoid me, talking softly as the sun went down. One evening, as the sky turned gold, Sarah joined me by the fenster. Doc holding a clipboard and 2 coffees. "You sure you won't reconsider joining the new board?" she asked. I shook my head. "I already did my part. You folks can handle the rest. You could use that engineer brain to make the next system fail-proof." "It already is," I said, looking at the reflection of the boathouse lights in the water. "It's powered by honesty now. That's harder to short out than any wire." She smiled. "I'll take that as your official retirement statement. Put it on the record." After she left, I stayed on the dock, letting the cold creep into the boards beneath me. The moon rose slow and clear, painting the lake in silver. Somewhere across the water, a frog croaked, and a breeze stirred the cattails, their shadows bending like brushstrokes across the surface. I looked toward the far shore, where the Whitfield house still stood. Empty, dark, its for sale sign tilted in the wind. The reflection of that crooked sign shimmered beside the perfect one, of the new charger post. Two sides of the same story, one built on greed, the other on grace. I tossed a small pebble into the lake and watched the ripples spread outward, fading softly into the stillness. Out here, time moves slower. The air carries everything that happened, and everything forgiven. I turned back toward the house, lights warm in the windows, a soft hum from the fridge reminding me the current was steady and mine again. Before closing the door for the night, I glanced once more toward the dark water and whispered, "Out here, power isn't stolen, it's earned, and the current always remembers who tried to cheat the flow." The wind answered with the soft clap of a loose shutter, like a closing chapter, and the lake mirrored the stars until dawn. If you've ever had to stand your ground for what's right, you know justice doesn't always come easy, but it's worth the wait. Drop a justice in the comments if you've ever dealt with an HOA or a neighbor who pushed too far, and if you believe every person deserves peace on their own land. Hit subscribe. Stick around for more true stories of grit, grace, and good old-fashioned American justice.